In the distant corners of the galaxy, in a cold, lifeless space station, there lived an alien woman. Her name, though once whispered with pride in her home world, had long been forgotten. She was a slave now, forced to serve the cruel masters, who had taken everything from her. Her planet, her people, all vanished in the wake of a brutal invasion, leaving her with only memories of a life that could never return. She worked tirelessly on the station, moving from one task to the next, without a moment's rest. The sound of machinery and harsh commands from her overseers filled her every waking moment. She had no choice but to obey. Every step she took, every breath she drew, was a reminder of her captivity. She had learned to bury her emotions, too. Numb herself to the pain and suffering of being treated like property. Her appearance was striking. With pale blue skin that shimmered faintly in the light, her hair, long and silvery, cascaded down her back, a reminder of the elegance of her lost world. Yet no one cared to look beyond the surface. To them, she was just another slave, another alien to control, another creature to subjugate. He was just one more pawn in their endless game of power. For years, she had been forced to serve countless masters, each one crueler than the last. They demanded her labor, her obedience, and in return, they gave her nothing. No kindness, no care. Just endless work. She had learned to live without hope, to survive each day, knowing that escape was impossible. She had resigned herself to a life of servitude, her spirit broken by the weight of her circumstances. But on this day, something was different. A new human arrived on the station. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see through everything. His presence was different from the others. There was something about him, a softness, a kindness in his gaze that made her pause in her work. He was not like the other humans who had passed through the station. They were often ruthless and dismissive, treating the slaves as nothing more than tools. But this man, he looked at her, not as a slave, but as if she were something more. She tried to ignore him, as she always did with new arrivals. But when their eyes met for the first time, something stirred within her. It was a brief moment, just a glance. But it felt like the first breath of fresh air after years of suffocating silence. The human did not speak to her immediately. He watched her from a distance, his gaze following her as she worked. She felt a knot form in her stomach. She was used to being ignored or commanded, but this man, this man saw her. He saw her as a person, not just a tool to be used. And it terrified her. As the hours passed, she found herself stealing glances at him. He didn't shout orders like the others. Instead, he spoke softly to the other slaves, asking them questions and offering assistance. It was odd to see someone who cared about the well-being of those like her. It was so strange, so foreign, that she couldn't understand why he was doing it. When the day ended, she returned to the small, cold quarters where she slept, exhausted. She lay on the hard cot, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the thoughts swirling in her mind. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept thinking of him, the human with the kind eyes. What did it mean? Why did he look at her that way? The next day he was there again. This time he didn't just watch from a distance. He came up to her as she worked, moving toward her with a quiet but purposeful step. Her heart raced, and she quickly lowered her eyes, afraid that he might speak to her, afraid that she might speak to him, but he did speak. His voice was gentle, warm, almost reassuring. "You don't have to work so hard," he said, offering a hand. "Let me help you." She froze, unsure of how to respond. It had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness. So long since anyone had offered to help her without expecting something in return. For a moment, she just stared at him. And then, instinctively, she shook her head. I can't," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I have to work." "I don't have a choice?" He didn't push. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he understood. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel less alone in the vast emptiness of space. "You always have a choice," he said quietly, before walking away. The words lingered in her mind long after he had gone. He was right, wasn't he? She had always believed that escape was impossible, that there was no way out of the life she had been forced into. But what if he was right? What if she had been wrong all along? The days passed, and she saw the human. More often, he continued to treat her with a kindness she had never known, helping her whenever he could, always with a respectful distance, never pushing her to accept his help. But the more she saw him, the more her walls began to crack. One day, she was cleaning the kitchen area. He approached her again, this time holding out a small, shiny object in his hand. It was a simple thing, just a small pendant, shaped like a star. "I thought you might like this," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "It's just a token of kindness." For a moment she couldn't speak. Her heart swelled in her chest and she had to fight back the tears. No one had ever given her anything before, let alone something that wasn't tied to her servitude. The simple gesture of kindness stirred something deep inside her, something she had thought was long gone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made her chest tighten with an unfamiliar emotion. "You're welcome," he said before turning to leave. As he walked away, she clutched the pendant tightly in her hand, her fingers trembling. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe, just maybe, she could be free. Days turned into weeks, and still, the human visited her. At first, she was cautious, too cautious. She had learned long ago that kindness was often followed by betrayal, and she couldn't risk trusting him completely. But something about him was different. His actions spoke louder than his words. He never asked for anything in return for his kindness, and he always seemed to know just when she needed help. It wasn't just the small acts of assistance that made her feel strange. It was the way he treated her. He never saw her as a slave. To him, she was just a person worthy of kindness and respect. He had never asked her to serve him, never commanded anything from her. For the first time in years, she found herself feeling like a human being again. She often wondered what it was that made him act so differently from the others. Most humans, especially the ones who passed through the station, had no interest in the slaves. They saw them as less than people. But this human was different. He looked at her with eyes full of understanding, not disgust or indifference. His eyes were kind, and he never seemed to rush her or treat her like she was beneath him. One evening, when she was working in the storage bay, organizing crates of supplies, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, half expecting it to be one of the overseers ready to bark orders at her. But it wasn't them. It was him again, the human. He smiled at her, and this time, she didn't look away. She had grown used to his presence, and for some reason, she no longer felt the need to hide from him. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice soft, as always. She shook her head, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't spoken much to him yet, keeping her words simple and few, but somehow in his presence, the need to speak had grown. "No, you're not disturbing me," she replied, her voice hesitant, but not as guarded as before. He stepped closer. And for the first time, he wasn't just observing her from a distance. He stood beside her, his presence somehow comforting, like a quiet shelter in the middle of a storm. "I noticed you've been working late again," he said, his tone gentle. "You should take a break. It's not healthy to push yourself so hard." She felt a warmth rise in her chest, but she quickly pushed it down. She wasn't used to kindness. She didn't know how to accept it. "I have to finish," she said simply, returning her attention to the crates. It was the only way she knew how to cope, by focusing on the work and shutting out everything else. But he didn't leave. He didn't push her to talk or try to convince her. Instead, he stood there quietly, watching her, as though he was content just being near her. After a few minutes, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "You know, I've been here for a while now, and I've noticed something about you. You're stronger than you think. You don't have to hide behind all this work. You're allowed to rest. You deserve to rest." She stiffened at his words, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She didn't know how to rest, not truly. Every moment of her life had been about survival, about getting through the day, about enduring whatever came next. But he saw something in her she couldn't see herself strength. A person who deserved more than just survival. "You deserve to be happy," he added, and his words caught her off guard. Happiness. It felt like such a distant concept, something that was never meant for someone like her. She looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She couldn't remember the last time someone had told her that, not in a way that felt real. "I don't know how to be happy," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't even know if I deserve to be happy," he smiled, a warm, reassuring smile. "Everyone deserves to be happy. No one should live a life of suffering if they can help it. And you, more than anyone, deserve to know what it feels like to be free." Her heart skipped a beat. Free. The word sounded foreign to her. But it also stirred something deep inside her, something she had long buried. She had never known freedom. She had always been a prisoner, a slave to someone's will. The idea of being free, truly free, seemed impossible. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, lowering her eyes. He seemed to understand her hesitation, and he didn't push her further. Instead, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that felt like a lifeline. She tensed at the touch, but didn't pull away. There was something about it that made her feel less alone, less broken. "You don't have to understand it all at once," he said. "I'm not asking you to, but I want you to know that you have a choice. You don't have to stay in this life. You can choose to live differently if you want to." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that there was a way out, a way to break free from the chains that had held her for so long. But fear gripped her. She had never dared to hope. She had never been allowed to dream. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" His eyes softened, and he stepped a little closer, as if to bridge the distance between them. "'Cause you matter. You're not just a slave. You're a person, a woman with a future. I want to help you see that." Her heart raced at his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something beyond fear. It was a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of something that could grow if she let it. As he turned to leave, he looked back at her one last time. "I'll be here, whenever you're ready." That night, she lay in her small cot, the pendant he had given her held tightly in her hand. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about his kindness, about the way he had made her feel seen for the first time in years. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't known in a long time, the possibility of freedom. Days continued to pass, and the alien woman found herself thinking more and more about the human, his words, his actions. The kindness he had shown her everything was starting to break through the walls she had built around her heart. She had never allowed herself to dream of a life outside her servitude, but now the idea seemed possible. The more she thought about it, the more she wanted it. The more she wanted him, but with those thoughts came fear. Deep down, she knew that. Making a move meant risking everything. The overseers, the guards, and the harsh laws of the empire would never allow a slave to escape. The punishment for such an act was brutal. Even thinking of it felt dangerous. She knew she couldn't make such a decision alone. So one evening, when the work on the station was quieter than usual, she found herself walking toward him. He was in the same place he always was, standing by a terminal, talking to a few other workers. But as soon as he saw her approaching, he excused himself and walked over. "Hey, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low and gentle as if sensing her unease. She nodded, though her heart raced in her chest. She had never spoken so openly before, but something about him made her feel like she could trust him. After all, he had been the only person to show her kindness, the only person who had treated her like a human being. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. His expression softened immediately. "Of course. On your mind?" She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. The station was dimly lit, and most of the crew was finishing up their shifts. But the thought of being overheard still made her stomach tighten. "I don't know how to ask this," she began slowly, "but can you help me escape?" His eyes widened slightly, but his expression didn't change. He didn't look shocked or scared. He looked like he had been waiting for her to say it. "You want to leave?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her heart beating faster now. "Yes. I can't live like this anymore. I can't stay here. But I can't do it alone. I don't know how." He was silent for a moment, looking at her with a deep, thoughtful gaze. She couldn't read the look in his eyes, but she didn't want to look away. For a long time she had been alone. Now she was asking for help, for trust, for the chance at something more. The idea of being free, truly free, seemed so far away. Finally, he spoke. "I'll help you, but we need to be careful. If we're caught, it will be dangerous. You know that, right?" She nodded again, her voice barely a whisper. "I know, but I don't care. I can't stay here." He took a deep breath and looked around again, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "Right, here's what we'll do. I've been observing the routines here. I know when the guards are the least attentive. I'll get a small transport ready, something fast. It won't be easy, but we can do it. It won't be perfect, but we'll try." Her heart soared at his words. He was going to help her. He was going to help her escape. "I'm not asking you to do this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't want you to risk your life for me. I'm just a slave." He stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm and comforting, like a promise. "You're not just a slave. You're a person, and you deserve to be free. I'll do." His words struck a chord deep inside her, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that freedom wasn't just a dream. It was real, and it was within her reach. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much." He smiled softly, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You don't have to say anything, just trust me. We'll get you out of here." The next few days were a blur. They worked in secret, carefully making plans and getting supplies without attracting attention. He had connections with a few of the station's workers who weren't as loyal to the Empire. They helped with getting the materials they would need. They worked quickly with urgency, knowing that time was running out as the days passed. The alien woman found herself feeling both terrified and excited. The thought of leaving the station, of escaping the life she had known for so long, filled her with hope. No, but there was also fear of what might happen if they were caught. The consequences would be brutal, and they both knew it. On the night they planned to leave, she felt a mixture of emotions. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her palms sweating. She stood in her small quarters, looking around at the life she had spent years trying to survive in. This was the last time she would see it. She would never return to this cold, lifeless place. When the human arrived at her door, he smiled at her, though his expression was tense. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She was scared, yes, but she was also ready. Ready to take that first step into the unknown. Ready to take control of her own life. "I'm ready," she whispered, nodding. He reached out to her, gently taking her hand in his. "Let's go." Together, they made their way to the small transport he had arranged. They moved quickly, staying in the shadows to avoid being seen. The station was quiet, with most of the crew still working or resting. But as they neared the docking bay, she could feel her heart race. The ship was waiting for them, hidden in a small, unmarked hangar. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. It was their only chance. As they climbed aboard, she looked back. The station one last time. The place that had been her prison for so long was now behind her. And ahead of her, the unknown lay waiting. She was free. She was finally free. The engine of the small transport hummed softly as it lifted off the station, slipping into the deep darkness of space. The alien woman sat silently beside the human, her eyes fixed on the view outside the small window. The stars twinkled in the distance, but the sight of them only reminded her of everything she was leaving behind. She could still feel the weight of the station, the life she had known for so long, pressing down on her chest. But there was also something else, something new, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Freedom, the transport. Wasn't much. Just a small, unmarked ship. But it was all they had. The human had worked quickly to secure it, making sure no one would notice their departure. The quiet hum of the engine was a welcome sound. A promise of escape from the Empire that had held her captive for so many years. She turned to the human, who was focused on the controls, his expression serious but determined. He had kept his word, helping her escape when no one else would. He had risked his life, and now they were both on the run. How long until we're out of the empires? Reach? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at her, his eyes filled with reassurance. A few hours. We'll be in uncharted space by then. No one will be able to track us. But we need to be careful. We're not out of danger yet, she nodded, understanding the risks. She had never known a life outside the Empire's control. Everything was a risk now, from the moment they had left the station to the moment they would find a place where they could be safe. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of a life without fear, without the constant weight of oppression hanging over her. She dreamed of a place where she could be free, where she could live as her own person, not as someone's property. I don't know where we'll go after this, the human continued, his voice steady but thoughtful. But I promise I won't let anything happen to you. I'll make sure we both get to a place where we can be safe. His words filled her with warmth, and for a moment she felt a sense of calm that had eluded her for so long. The world outside might be uncertain, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who cared about her, someone who was willing to fight for her. It was a feeling she had never thought possible. As the hours passed, they traveled through space in silence, each lost in their thoughts. She couldn't help but think of the life she had left behind. The station had been a prison, but it had also been her reality. For so long, it had been all she knew. Now she was leaving it all behind, and she didn't know what the future held. She glanced at the human who was focused on the navigation console. His brow was furrowed in concentration. But there was also a glimmer of something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the same uncertainty she felt. But she could see that he was determined, just like her. "You've been so kind to me," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I don't understand why. Why are you helping?" "Me," he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he gave her a small, knowing smile as if he had expected the question. After a few moments, he spoke. "Because you matter," he said simply. "You're not just a slave, not just a victim of this empire. You're a person, with your own dreams, your own life to live. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Everyone deserves a chance at freedom, and you're no different." Her heart swelled at his words. He didn't see her as a slave or as a prisoner. To him, she was just a person. That was something she had never known. Even the other slaves on the station had never looked at her as an equal. They had all been marked by their suffering. But the human saw beyond that. "I don't know how to live like this," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I've spent so many years surviving, just trying to get by. I don't know how to be free." He turned to her, his expression softening. "You don't have to know right away. Freedom isn't something you just figure out overnight. It's something you learn day by day. You'll find your way, just like I found mine." She looked at him, studying his face. He wasn't perfect. He had his flaws, his struggles, just like anyone. But the way he spoke, the way he treated her, made her believe that maybe she could do this. Maybe she could find her place in the world, not as someone's property, but as her own person. The ship moved smoothly through space, and as the hours passed, she began to feel the weight of her past life slowly lift. There were still so many uncertainties ahead, but for the first time, she could see a future that wasn't defined by her captivity. There was hope, now real hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you. For everything." The human smiled again, but this time there was something more in his eyes. A warmth. A tenderness. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You don't owe me anything. We're in this together, and I'll always be here." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief, of hope, of a future she hadn't dared to imagine until now. As the transport continued to glide through the vast expanse of space, she closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the feeling of freedom. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was hers. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had the chance to start over, to live a life that was her own. And as the stars passed by outside the window, she realized something else. The most important thing in the world wasn't just freedom, was the connection they shared. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who cared for her, and that, more than anything, gave her the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The days passed quickly, each one a step further away from the life she had known. The small transport, their only refuge, traveled through uncharted space, away from the oppressive empire that had kept her a prisoner for so long. For the first time in years, the alien woman felt something she thought was lost to her. Peace, the human, ever steady and calm, continued to guide their journey. They navigated through the stars, finding safe places to rest, avoiding any detection from the empire. His quiet confidence made her feel secure, even as they ventured deeper into the unknown. He never once showed fear, only determination to keep her safe. And it was this that made her heart swell with gratitude. In the solitude of space, she found herself growing more and more comfortable in his presence. They talked during the long hours, sharing stories and laughter, finding comfort in each other's company. He told her about his home, the world he came from, a place so different from the dark station and cold ships they had known. She listened intently, fascinated by the idea of a place where people could live without fear, without chains. But it wasn't just his stories that held her attention. It was him, his kindness, his strength, the way he always made her feel like she was more than just a slave. In his eyes, she was not defined by her past, by the suffering she had endured. To him, she was a person. And that made her feel like something she had never allowed herself to be before. Worthy. One evening, as the two of them sat quietly by the small window of the transport, looking out at the stars, the human turned to her. His face was soft, his gaze steady, but there was something in his eyes, a depth of emotion that she had never seen before. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice calm but serious, "about us, about what comes next." She looked at him, her heart racing, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, then spoke again. "I want to build a future with you, not just as someone who saved you from the station, but as someone I care about." She felt her breath catch in her throat. His words hit her harder than she expected, a rush of emotions flooding through her. She had never thought of herself as someone deserving of love, someone who could have a future with another person. But here he was, speaking to her like she was everything he wanted. You want that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He nodded, his expression soft but filled with conviction. "I do. I've never met anyone like you. You're strong, kind and brave, even when you don't see it. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building something together." Her heart raced in her chest. She didn't know what to say. Her entire life had been spent in servitude, and the idea of being someone's equal, being loved, felt both wonderful and impossible. Could it really be true? Could she truly have a future that was her own, one where she wasn't defined by the chains that had bound her for so long? But before she could speak, he took her hand in his grip, gentle but firm. "I know it might seem sudden, but I want you to know that I'm serious. I'm not asking for some temporary thing. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her mind. The idea of being someone's wife, of having a family, future seemed so far away from the life she had lived. But it was also everything she had ever wanted, even if she didn't know it until now. Tears filled her eyes. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel them. She had been so afraid to hope, so afraid to dream, but here he was, offering her everything she had never thought possible. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I will marry you." A smile spread across his face, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace. She rested her head on his chest, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. It felt like a promise of something more than just survival. It felt like the beginning of a life she had never dared to imagine. For so long, she had believed that love was something reserved for others, something she would never have. But here she was, holding on to the man who had shown her what kindness, respect, and love truly meant. He saw her for who she was, not for the chains that had bound her, not for the darkness of her past. To him, she was someone worth loving. "I've waited for this moment," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a chance at a new life, a life where she could finally be free, where she could be loved without fear or shame. As they pulled away, he kissed her forehead gently. "I'll always protect you," he whispered. "I'll always be here, no matter what." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. She wasn't just someone's property anymore. She wasn't defined by her past or the scars it had. Left on her soul, she was a woman, free to choose her future. And with him by her side, she knew anything was possible. The days that followed the proposal felt like a dream. The alien woman couldn't stop smiling, even when she tried. The simple words he had spoken, "Will you marry me?" kept repeating in her mind, like a melody she had never heard before. She had never imagined a future where she could be loved, respected, and cherished. But now it was all real. The small transport they had escaped in was now more than just a means of escape. It was a home. Her home was safe and secure, far from the empire that had enslaved her for so long. Together they had found a quiet, peaceful corner of space where no one could find them. It was their little piece of freedom, their sanctuary. As they traveled, they spoke more about their future. The human had a plan to build a life. Together, they talked about the possibilities, about starting fresh, about creating something new. The alien woman had never thought she would have choices. But now with him, she felt as though the world was open to her. One evening, as they sat together in the small lounge area of their ship, looking out at the stars, the human turned to her, his eyes warm and steady. "Do you know what I've been thinking?" he asked, his voice soft. She looked at him, her heart swelling with affection. "What?" "I've been thinking about our wedding," he said, smiling. "I know we don't have much, but I want it to be special. I want you to know how much this means to me." She felt her heart skip a beat at his words. "You don't have to do anything special," she said quickly, though her voice softened. "Just being with you, that's enough." He reached out and took her hand, gently squeezing it. "I know, but I want to make this moment as perfect as I can. You deserve that. You deserve more than anything I could give you, but I'll give you all I have." She could feel the sincerity in his words, and it made her feel something deep inside, something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Love. True love. The kind that didn't come with conditions. The kind that was built on respect and trust. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered. "I never thought I would be loved. It's not after everything I've been through, but you, ... You've shown me that love isn't something to be afraid of." He smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'll always be here for you. You'll always have a place with me." The alien woman leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder, her eyes closing as she took in the peaceful moment. The stars outside seemed to shine brighter than ever before, as if they, too, were celebrating the love that was growing between them. In the days that followed, the human kept his promise to make their wedding special. He worked quietly, planning everything with careful attention. He found a small, quiet planet, a place untouched by the Empire's reach. They would have their wedding there, surrounded by nature and the beauty of the stars. The alien woman watched as he worked, seeing the effort and care he put into every detail. He wasn't doing it for a grand ceremony. He was doing it because he wanted this moment to be something they both remembered, a symbol of their new beginning. Finally, the day arrived. It was a simple ceremony, just the two of them under the stars. The alien woman wore a simple white dress, a gown that was light and flowing. She had never worn something like this before. It felt strange but beautiful. She felt beautiful. For the first time, she didn't feel out of place in the world. As they stood there, facing each other, the human took her hands in his eyes filled with love and sincerity. "You've given me everything I ever wanted," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I will spend the rest of my life giving you everything you deserve. I promise to love you, protect you, and be with you for as long as I live." The alien woman felt her heart swell in her chest, and tears filled her eyes. She had never imagined this moment, but here it was. She had found someone who saw her, who loved her not for what she had been, but for who she was. "I promise the same," she whispered. "I will love you. I will be with you, and I will always choose you." With those words they exchanged, simple vows, pledging themselves to each other, not in front of a crowd, but under the vast expanse of the stars, with nothing but each other. It was a quiet, intimate moment, but to them, it was everything. As they kissed, the alien woman realized something. She had been broken once. She had been a slave, a prisoner of her past. But now, she was free. She was free to love, to live, to be herself. And that was the greatest gift she could ever receive. In the days that followed, they settled into their new life, building their future together. They didn't have much, just the small transport, the stars, and each other, but it was more than enough. For the first time, the alien woman felt whole. She wasn't a slave anymore. She wasn't someone to be controlled or defined by her past. She was someone with a future, someone with hope, and most importantly, someone who was loved. They explored new worlds together, finding places that were peaceful and beautiful. They took long walks on distant planets, watched sunsets that seemed to last forever, and dreamed of what their life could become. And through it all, the alien woman knew one thing for sure: her life had changed forever. She had been given the greatest gift of all, love. And it was a love that would carry her through anything that came next.